58, Charles Moscowitz. Of course, the flagship website is charlesmoscowitz.com, and the flagship station for live streaming and chats is Rumble. And I don't have, YouTube is not my main station because YouTube, every so often, I have to shut it down on YouTube, mainly because I'm worried about censorship, which is why I say sign up on Rumble and you shall be included there. You can do chats on Rumble. And you can, of course, do chats on, there we go, Rumble's up and running. Come on down on Rumble. And you can go live and check out the program on YouTube as well. Let me just see, where is my YouTube chat? Sometimes YouTube doesn't kick in right away. Let me just see what's going on with YouTube, if everything is functioning. Of course, I'm doing this through Restream. And Restream, by the way, it happens to be a Ukrainian company. They sent me a note about that, and they, these guys, apparently a lot of tech people are Ukrainian. There we go. We're online on there it is. Okay. Anyway, look, I'm just doing a little harumphing here until we get up and functioning, because I want to lay out my initial thoughts. But I want to wait a little bit until everybody is happening. In the meantime, there we go. Okay, so we're now live on YouTube. Let me just make sure my volume is down. In the meantime, yeah, there we go. Okay, so obviously the news of the day is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The world feels like, and probably is, very close to a nuclear war, the very nightmare that we've all had, and I certainly have had since I can remember. I remember as a child, thinking about nuclear war and being told, you have to duck and cover, kiss your ass goodbye, basically, crawl under the desk. And just a horrible thing. I mean, for the human mind to try to get around it is, it's almost inconceivable. But I want to talk about the whole issue of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Michael Savage did a very good talk on this today. Excuse me. Make sure that things aren't falling. I've always liked Michael Savage. He gets right to it. It's very painful sometimes listening to him, but he's a great veteran talk show host. And he brought up some issues that I think made me think more broadly about the development. And that is that, first of all, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is not new. It goes back 1,000 years. It goes back to when Christianity, when Russia became Orthodox Christian, which was in the 10th century. And he gets into how this all happened. Saint Basil and Saint Cyril, who developed the Cyrillic alphabet, and the whole mission of Russia at that time, which was to inherit and continue the Byzantine Empire, which was under siege at that time by Turks. And that the Byzantine Christianity, Greek Orthodox Christianity, is very different from Western Catholic and eventually Protestant Christianity, in that it is a strong relationship between the state and the church. There's a strong sense of nationalism, that the church has a divine mission. Now, I'm not here to either endorse or criticize. I'm simply recounting some of the general history as I understand it. And again, my understanding is fairly limited. I'm not claiming to be an expert here. But we need to understand what this is about, so we can understand some of the dynamics right now with regard to Ukraine. And I'm going to bring it up to today's politics. But let's just say that the Russian image of itself, the Russian people and their image of themselves and of their role in the world, was to be a divine nation, that they believed this is holy Russia, that they were there as like the Byzantines believed, they were there as representing Christ and God on earth as a nation that strove to set an example. It's not dissimilar to, frankly, the Jewish understanding of Israel, that it's a chosen nation that is supposed to be God's country. It's supposed to be set an example for the world, a light unto the nations. That there's a divine spiritual aspect to statehood for the Jewish people in Israel, and that there's a mission, there's a reason, there's a purpose for the existence that goes beyond the basic secular understanding. Well, Russia saw itself that way, and it was a very strong national identity that combined that with a strong Orthodox Christian identity. I mean, if you look at a map of Russia, starting with the Kievan Rus, which was really the founding of the state, and it actually was founded in Kiev, ironically, or Kiev, and then eventually Moscow, competed with Kiev, still does, in that it was a response to the Mongol invasion. But either way, there was this strong cohesion, this sense of a purpose, whereas in Western Europe, you didn't have that. Western Europe was more divvied up between small principalities and dukedoms and princely states, and it had more to do with heredity of kings who would marry the princess of another kingdom, and then they would inherit this, their duchy, and people cobbled together states that were more based upon, aristocratic tendencies. Not that there isn't that in Russia, but the idea was that it was less oriented toward, a kind of this united national identity combined with a Christian identity. It was more that Christianity was left up to primarily the Pope in Rome and his bishops, and that was separate from the state, which was not centralized. So there were kings, but it was mainly the local feudal princedoms. And eventually Europe, of course, did develop national states. And a lot of that actually had to do with the Protestant Reformation and the establishment of state churches in Protestant countries. But Russia had always had that. And this was a strong moral force. It was a strong sense of identity. It was a strong national identity, a linguistic identity, a cultural identity, and a religious identity, all wrapped up into an overall Russian entity that existed for 1,000 years. Now, of course, the Soviet Union and the Bolshevik Revolution, they tried to destroy Russia and this identity. They felt that they could replace this sense of central cohesion with themselves, the secular force, and they failed. They held on for something like 70 years, 1917 up to 1989. But it should be acknowledged that communism failed in Russia. And Russia, once again, the religious impulse reemerged and became the dominant force in Russia. And part of that religious impulse was a rejection of Western values, this idea that Russia would have its own way. This was the ethos of the Romanov emperors as well, all the way from Ivan the Terrible right up to Nicholas II. And that they rejected Western influence. They wanted to have their own sphere of influence. Now, I want to, before getting into the politics of today and what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, I would suggest that if we understand, or if we begin to understand the nature of this Russian ethos, this nationalism, this Russian orthodoxy, then we would have to reject both the left wing and the right wing assumptions about the crisis right now, the invasion of Ukraine. In a nutshell, and I know I'm simplifying, but that's how it goes. On the left, they view Putin as basically the reincarnation of Hitler, and Russia as the reincarnation of Nazi Germany, which of course they view as on the right. We could argue that. That's another subject. And that so thus when Putin and the Russians invade Ukraine, they are doing so because they have a vision to conquer all of Europe. They want to, Ukraine is nothing more than a stepping stone. And that eventually they will try to conquer Europe and finally conquer the world. And that's the right-wing understanding. The left-wing understanding is, well, no, that's the left, I'm sorry, I'm really confused here. That's the left-wing understanding of the conflict. And again, I'm simplifying here, I'm generalizing, fine. The right-wing understanding of the conflict is actually very similar, and it's based upon a thesis that was presented by Soviet defector Anatoly Golitsyn, who defected from the Soviet Union in the late 1970s. He was given asylum in the United States by Jimmy Carter. And he wrote a book called New Lies for Old, where he basically says that Russia would change its public identity, they would change their spots, they would claim to be liberals, they would claim to be, and I mean that in the Western sense, not in the liberal left-wing sense. They would claim to be capitalists, they would claim to be free market at some point. But the truth is that they really wouldn't be. They would still be communists, but they would just change their names and they would be secretly communist. And this understanding is based on this principle that Vladimir Putin was a communist, and he certainly was, and he's a KGB agent, and that doesn't change. He's still a communist, and his administration is still communist, and their mission is still the same mission that the old Soviet Union had, which is to basically conquer their neighbors and subvert the world and create a dictatorship of the proletariat, which was their ultimate vision. I would suggest that neither of these things are true. Now, again, this is my opinion, but I would suggest that based upon general observation of Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I do believe that it did collapse. I don't accept the Golitsyn theory. I think that communism imploded on its own rot in 1989, 1990. The hammer and sickle was buried. Communism is dead in Russia. And that Vladimir Putin did change. Vladimir Putin, as a leader of Russia, thus represents the Russian ethos. And this is why he's very, very popular in Russia, or at least up until today. Maybe that's changing, but it does so because Vladimir Putin is a Russian nationalist, and he's a Russian Orthodox Christian. This is the animating factor for Vladimir Putin. He does not want his country to be taken over by the internationalist liberal establishment that really can't be described in the real sense as either left or right, but that basically is the main driver of the world right now. It's what President Trump, I think, accurately called the deep state. It's what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. 617-396-4958. You're welcome to join the conversation. I see we're getting people jumping on some of the platforms here. 617-396-4958. Charles Moscowitz, Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time. As I conduct this live program, I get a comment here from Eddie Franks. You have got to be kidding, right? The proof is undeniable. Well, first of all, I haven't quite gotten into what's actually happening yet. I mean, I'm not delusional. Yeah, Russia is invading Ukraine, and that's evil. I'm not supporting that. Nobody is, I don't believe. Let's see, listen to this gentleman. Thank you. Okay, 617-396-4958. We are doing the live program as I am doing every evening from 10 p.m. to midnight, although Friday evenings I'm probably not going to live stream. I'm going to, you'll have to get the best of, so to speak. Okay, so getting back to the topic at hand. In America, we always like to side with, why was I suspended for this? I don't know. Okay, it looks like I was suspended on TikTok. Somebody complained. What did I say? I mean, I referred to Putin as a nationalist and as a Russian Orthodox. Whatever. So I now suspended on TikTok. All right. So I'm still running apparently on YouTube, where I'm still okay. Is there something I've said that's so controversial? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess that some fascist at TikTok probably thinks so. I don't know what. But whatever it is, I mean, I think that my comments are pretty much within the Overton window here. We're talking about the nature of Putin and what's going on. I'm not supporting Putin. I think Putin's evil. I'm against any attack on any sovereign nation. Let's just be clear. I'm not soft on Putin's militarism. I'm simply trying to understand what's going on. I think that they're motivated, as I said, getting back, not by an attempt to conquer the world. It's not a utopian movement like the far left and the far right were in the form of Nazism and communism. It's a nationalist movement. I think Putin is a Russian nationalist, and he is a Russian Orthodox Christian, and those are the motivating factors in his invasion of Ukraine. That doesn't mean that he has a right to invade Ukraine. He doesn't. It's wrong. Let's be clear. But we need to understand what his motivations are and what makes him tick and what makes Russia tick right now in order to really get a handle on what to do. Now, I think that, we have to talk about how to bring about peace and how to bring about a cessation of hostilities. And that's my purpose here, why I'm doing this. Because Russia has this nationalistic image of itself and this kind of Christian Orthodox mission, they are concerned about a Ukraine that is aligning itself with its enemies in the West. There is a lot of agitation with regard to Ukraine joining NATO, which, I don't think that they should. I think that it's a step too far for NATO to form a military alliance with Ukraine, which would basically essentially put American forces right in the eastern part of Russia. I mean, just, a stone's throw away from Moscow. Let's say if you take a look at the border of Ukraine and Russia, it's a 1,000-mile border, and it goes right into the very heart of Russia's country. It's really very, very near the Volga. It's kind of the lines that Hitler occupied when he invaded Russia in Operation Barbarossa in 1941. And I think that there is a problem for Russia in that regard. That doesn't mean that Ukraine should not be a sovereign, popular, successful, prosperous nation. It should be. But they don't necessarily need to form an alliance with Russia's enemies, a military alliance. I also don't know if they really need to be a part of the European Union, because the European Union is an entity that, and this is why the British got out of it, it's an entity that compromises the sovereignty of European states. In a way, it replaces elements not only of those states in the conventional sense of what sovereignty is, but it also even gets involved in social engineering and rather minute rules and regulations over the personal lives of the citizens who are members of nations that have joined the European Union. The European Union, I think, at the end of the day, is a superstate. And it's a hyper socialist state. It's not nationalist. It's more secular socialist in nature. And that is problematic for Russia to have the Ukraine involved in something like that. It really puts Ukraine solidly in the Western camp and culturally away from Russia. And I think that Russia has a legitimate concern about that as a country that wants to preserve and advance its own culture and its own history. Now, that doesn't mean that Ukraine should not be sovereign. It should be sovereign. I give the example, and I mentioned this the other day when I was on with David, that, Finland, for example, shares a long border with Russia. Finland had been allied with the Nazis during World War II. They had fought a war with Russia and they won. But after the war and after Hitler had been destroyed and defeated, Finland realized that they could not join NATO, they could not join the European Union. They had to be neutral in order to maintain a general affinity for Russia, a relationship with Russia that would be peaceful, and that Russia would, in an indirect way, have a lot of influence over Finland's relations with the world and their foreign policy, and even to a certain extent their culture, in order for them to survive, and in order for them to remain sovereign. Their sovereignty didn't mean that they could develop a big army or ally themselves with nations that have big armies that would threaten Russia. Let's not forget that the Finland border is only, I think, a 40-minute drive to Leningrad, which is Russia's second largest city. And so Finland maintained this kind of relationship with Russia, and they still do. There's been terms for this, Finlandization, but I would point out that Finland, as a result, has become one of the most successful societies in the world, one of the most prosperous societies. They have an enormous, they're called startup nation like Israel is. I mean, they've got great technologies and they've got great creativity, and it certainly is a capitalist country, but it maintains this kind of special relationship, this rather junior relationship, if you will, with Moscow. Now, I will give two other examples of this in the geopolitical world we live in. If Israel was ever to try to create a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, I don't think there's any question that such a state would not be able to just simply develop a full army and form alliances and have their own foreign policy, which could involve a military alliance with Israel's enemies, like, let's say, Iran, which would put Iranian military troops, within walking distance of downtown Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Israel would be insane to do that. That doesn't mean that there can't be some sort of a political entity, even possibly something that would be akin to a state, for Palestinian Arabs. But it would have to be done within that context. The third example would be if, for example, China formed a military alliance with Mexico that, was like a mutual defense pact, which is that if Mexico is ever attacked by any other nation, China would be at war with that nation. Well, what would happen if China did that? If Mexico did that, and you had Chinese troops in Mexico on the U.S. border, or for that matter, in Canada on the U.S. border, and let's say there was an incident, a drug dealer or a drug gang crossed the border, and the United States, had a shootout with them, and we attacked them, and we apprehended them. Mexico could view that as an act of war, and as a result, they could invade the United States with millions of Chinese troops. Now, again, I know I'm being theoretical here, but I'm just noting that, there are such things as spheres of influence where you have various powers that have special interests who need to, develop peaceful relations with their neighbors. And part of those peaceful relations are that those neighbors don't form alliances with enemies. It's just that simple. I mean, this is an American doctrine that goes actually back to the Monroe Doctrine, which was written by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams for President Monroe in the 1820s, that basically declared the entire Western Hemisphere as an area of American interests. We would respect the sovereignty of all of the nations in the Western Hemisphere, which of course we have not done perfectly, especially starting around the turn of the century, we started to poke our nose into the Western Hemisphere. And I think that's been wrong. But the principle was there in that we would respect the sovereignty of the Western nations, of the Latin American nations, and that any attempt by the superpowers, and of course back then that was Britain and France, to interfere with the sovereignty or to form alliances, frankly, with these nations that would be a military in nature, that this would be viewed by the United States as an act of war. And that doctrine worked very well. It still does, with the one exception. Well, there are two exceptions. One of them was that during the Civil War, briefly, France grabbed Mexico and installed a Habsburg king, the poor Maximilian, who ended up facing a firing squad later. But they did it at a moment of weakness for the United States. We were at war with each other. This was the Civil War. And of course, the second instance was Cuba, when the Soviet Union moved troops into Cuba and allied itself with a communist Cuba, which was a complete violation of the Monroe Doctrine, and which has been a source of great consternation and difficulty for the United States and for Cuba, obviously, but for our entire foreign policy ever since. So, I think that having said that, it seems to me to be a perfectly logical for European nations to form military alliances, but it also seems logical for me to assume that Russia and its immediate neighbors not necessarily would form military alliances, but at least there would be an informal understanding. There would be an informal, relationship where the neighbors would not form alliances with enemies of Russia and forces that might threaten Russian sovereignty in some way. Okay, so you're welcome to join the program, 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. And you're certainly welcome to join me on Rumble and on YouTube. We've got some chats already. Thank you. I love your TikToks, but I've not seen you there for a while. Yeah, well, TikTok is a little bit of a problem for me. Look, they just shut down my live stream. I don't know why. TikTok is, look, I don't know. Are they run by China? I don't know what the deal is with TikTok. Did I say something? I mean, I think that maybe somebody might have misinterpreted my comments to mean that I actually support Russia when I don't. I mean, I don't know. I'll send an appeal over to TikTok and see if they change their mind. I don't know. Look, I mean, I'll just say as a matter of programming here, that one of the reasons why I live stream on something like 10 venues all simultaneously, and then I download the program to about 35 venues where you can either get the audio or the video audio, is because we are in an atmosphere of censorship. And I feel like, I'm determined to do this. So if one of them goes down, then the other one will be up. That's all I can do. I have no way of knowing. I don't own these places, obviously. They have their internal algorithms and they decide what they want to censor. It's not right. I mean, I know what I'm doing here. I'm not engaging in any sort of speech that would be a violation of community standards. I'm a veteran radio talk show host in Greater Boston, and I understand what community standards are. I also understand what political censorship is, and that's what's going on. And that's certainly what just happened on TikTok, which is why I was just suspended on TikTok. Yeah, thank you, Evermark. My live stream just ended on TikTok because it was shut down. Now, again, I'll appeal this. They'll probably let me come back on in a week. The suspension goes for a week, but I don't know. What do you think I said? Did I say something that would have pissed off TikTok? I don't know. All right, so let me bring things up to right now. And by the way, please subscribe to me on either YouTube or preferably on Rumble, because Rumble is really not censoring, and Rumble is the flagship of the show. Just put my name in the server at Rumble, Charles Moscowitz, and you will find my Rumble page. Please subscribe there. That would be really, really helpful in terms of building this program and doing so during very difficult and contentious times where I am being shut down, I'm being algorithmed, I'm being banned, and all of that stuff. So the way around that, again, is for me to do it on all these different venues and hopefully build a broad following on each one of them. Each one of them has their own strengths. So getting back to the subject at hand here, here in America, we automatically defend the sovereign rights of nations, and that's a good thing. And that's why we are supporting Ukraine. We also like to support the little guy, the underdog, that also describes Ukraine. We also are humanitarian, where we see innocent people being killed and having their houses bombed. That describes Ukraine, and that's contemptible. That's wrong. That's evil. And I think that we ought to do whatever we need to do to help Ukraine resist that and come to a peace agreement. I'm simply discussing the broader context of the conflict. I've described what I think Russia's motivations are right now. They're concerned with Western influence in Ukraine and with Ukraine politically aligning themselves with America's enemies. I also think that, frankly, there is more to this story that we don't know particularly. I think that it's safe to say that Ukraine had a coup d'etat in 2014, where a pro-Russian government of Yanukovych, who was elected in Ukraine, was overthrown by people who were backed by the European Union, by NATO, and possibly by that Hungarian billionaire. I'm not going to mention his name because I'll be banned at YouTube, but we know who I'm talking about, who wanted to get to Russia, who want to move Ukraine away from its Russian orbit, and who want to westernize Ukraine and secularize Ukraine, and who hate Russia because it's nationalist, because it's Orthodox Christian, because they want to secularize and socialize the entire planet. They want the whole world to be existing in their image. They certainly have done it in the United States. That's another subject for another day. Right now, I'm just talking about Russia and Ukraine. And that their motivations are not pure. The head of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, he's not pure. All right. I'm not going to go into details about his background. There were questions. I'm not going to get into what they are because I'm just going to stay live here on YouTube. Look into it for yourself. And the goings on in Ukraine have not been all that wholesome. We know business about the Biden family. Again, I'm very careful here. I don't want to go into details, but there's a lot of things coming out that involved major corruption in Ukraine by Western families and Western powers and Western people engaging in crime, including child trafficking. I've said it. Okay, take me down on YouTube, fine. I'm not saying it's happening there, but there's stuff going on in that society that's not great. And they are of concern. I mean, I think that most Ukrainians probably are not supportive of the Western approach either. I don't think that most Ukrainians particularly want to become a part of NATO and become a part of the West. Who knows? Maybe they do. But I think that, left to their own devices, without all this intrigue and all this foreign influence pushing people here and there, the Ukrainians would craft a sovereign state that would probably reflect and be more like Finland than, Germany. That it would be more like, Belarus, maybe not that subservient. Belarus is really a puppet of Russia, and I don't think Ukraine should be that. But at least sort of more in the Russian sphere, which actually is more, not only politically, but culturally, ethnically, religiously, more akin to where Ukraine is and where they have been historically. And so I think I'm going to wrap it up at this point. I feel a little taken aback and a little off center by being thrown off TikTok, I will admit. But I'm going to wrap it up, but I'll be back tomorrow night at 10 p.m. at the usual time. And I do have guests lined up for this week. You'll be posted on that. But let's just say that, first of all, we can pray for peace. We should support Ukraine's sovereignty. We should help stop the invasion by Russia. But we have to understand that for long-term peace there, Ukraine has to deal with Russia. And that means not aligning themselves with Western powers. And that the United States, we don't have an interest in having our boys and girls go over there and get killed in a conflict that goes way back and that we have no skin in, so to speak. I could say criticize the Biden administration and blame them, as have many, for weakness, for being perceived as illegitimate, and for Putin basically taking advantage of that. And I think that happens to be true. But I'm not going to go there. That's been done. Everyone knows what that's about. And we'll leave it at that. Anyway, on that note, I want to thank you for joining me this evening. Charles Moscowitz, please support the program by checking out my books. I don't ask for donations, but check out my books. My books are available at Amazon Books or at Barnes & Noble Books. I have, written 20 books there, all nonfiction, dealing with a cross-section of topics. And I've also written 5 or 6 pamphlets. My most recent pamphlets is about the Canadian truckers. Check it out. And my book, The Satanic Conspiracy, you can see it over here. That's a recent book. I've another recent book I've written on and I'm proud of is Sociology for Conservatives. I am a sociology student at Bunker Hill Community College here in Boston, and I'm developing conservative social theory, which is about time. Someone has to do it, right? I'm not claiming to be some genius in sociology, but hey, I hope to begin and contribute in some way toward the development of conservative social theory that hopefully could eventually become a school of sociology, because the main schools of sociology right now are left wing. It would be nice to see this, and I could get into that in a future show, what that's about. So on that note, I want to thank you for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz. Please subscribe to my stations at YouTube, but particularly at Rumble. You can check out my website, charlesmoskowitz.com, to find out all of the different platforms that carry the show. In case you see one or the other that's been shut down, you can go there. And on that night, I just want to say, God bless America. God bless you. God bless Ukraine. God bless the Canadian truckers.